All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We've just crossed the 100-day mark of the latest Middle East conflict, and we really need to unpack the incredible geopolitical web surrounding it. We are looking at a situation right now that has completely shattered previous norms. I mean, the old rules of engagement, they've practically been thrown out the window. So today, we're going to explore the hidden drivers behind these headlines, utilizing some genuinely fascinating insights and perspectives drawn directly from our sources. To do that, we're going to move from the micro to the macro. We'll start with the unprecedented direct missile strikes, see how this is effectively forcing Washington's hand, take a look at Iran's complex internal situation, and finally examine a highly provocative theory about global energy dominance. So let's kick things off at the surface level with those unprecedented direct strikes. If we look back just a bit, it's wild how quickly a U.S.-brokered ceasefire completely unraveled into direct, tit-for-tat missile strikes. Back in March, there was this nominal truce regarding Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, but, by mid-April, that was already being repeatedly violated. Then we get an official ceasefire announced as recently as June 4th, and yet, literally within days, a strike in Beirut took place. That directly provoked Iran to launch retaliatory strikes against Israel on a Sunday, exactly 100 days into this broader conflict. Now, this is huge because it marks the very first time Israel and Iran have launched direct attacks at each other since that ceasefire came into effect. It's a massive escalation that crosses previous red lines. Which brings us to our next major factor, how this battlefield chaos is essentially forcing America's hand. What's really fascinating here is how analysts observe both nations utilizing this conflict to force President Trump to be the first one to blink. The source material highlights this incredible dynamic. On one hand, you have Israel's strategy, where the prime minister is ostensibly testing patience, continuing the conflict, and even ignoring direct requests from Washington to halt retaliations. On the flip side, Iran's strategy is to lump these multiple fronts together, like the situation in Lebanon, and use them as leverage to establish a brand new equation of power. Basically, neither side is willing to budge on their red lines. Instead, they're using this direct confrontation to apply maximum pressure on the U.S. administration to step in and offer a deal that works in their favor. And according to the panel of analysts, Trump is feeling the heat and is desperate to make a deal. Why? Because of these massive, looming domestic milestones. The U.S. political calendar is absolutely packed right now. You've got the midterm elections coming up in November, the monumental 250th anniversary of the United States on the horizon, and the massive logistical undertaking of hosting the World Cup alongside Canada and Mexico. Analysts argue that with all these domestic pressures, the administration simply cannot afford an endlessly spiraling overseas war that's constantly destabilizing the global economy and dominating the news cycle. But hey, you might be wondering, what does this mean for the average person? Well, this isn't just an overseas issue. Reports indicate this conflict has already cost the average U.S. household $700. Think about that. When global shipping lanes like the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz are effectively blockaded or threatened, the cost of goods and energy just skyrockets. This $700 figure is exactly what makes this geopolitical chess game suddenly feel incredibly personal for taxpayers. And it's exactly why the political machine in Washington is so desperate to find an off-ramp. Now, the pressure isn't just on Washington. Let's pivot for a second and zoom in on Iran's internal equation. Analysts note a really dark paradox happening right now. The Iranian public has recently suffered through massive internal shocks. We're talking severe protests and intense economic hardship. The population is described as being in this state of limbo. They are deeply disappointed with their internal system, but at the same time, completely opposed to a devastating war on their own soil. But for the state, this external conflict actually provides a pretext. It gives them the iron fist needed to declare a state of emergency, tighten control, and use the threat of war to ensure their own internal survival. Actually, building on that, there's a super interesting perspective from political analyst Ali Alizadeh. He argues that despite all that domestic turmoil, Iran is no longer just reacting. They're actively choosing the time and place of their military engagements. He notes that Iran feels confident enough right now to establish a completely new equation of power in the region. For years, they largely used proxy forces to respond to attacks, right? But by choosing to launch direct strikes in retaliation for the Beirut attack, analysts suggest Iran is signaling a newfound confidence. They're attempting to rewrite the rules of engagement in real time, showing they won't just bow their heads and are willing to take unprecedented risks. Okay, for our final section, let's zoom all the way out to the grand macro level and look at the global energy strategy. There's a highly provocative theory from political analyst Richard Medhurst that we need to talk about. He suggests that these seemingly isolated conflicts around the world might actually be part of a grand racket to lock down the world's major oil and gas reserves, directly benefiting U.S. energy giants. When you look at the analysis, a really striking pattern emerges. Attacks on Russian refineries and the Nord Stream pipeline, that resulted in the U.S. becoming the #1 supplier of energy to Europe. The targeting of Venezuela's leadership, that coincided with U.S. companies like Chevron securing regional oil assets. And now, the blockading of the Strait of Hormuz and instability in the Middle East has led to record-high U.S. liquid natural gas exports. Medhurst's argument is that the world's 3 most oil and gas-rich regions are being squeezed all at once, creating this massive vacuum that U.S. corporations are eagerly filling. To put that into perspective, just look at this number. With the Middle East and Russia squeezed, Asian dependence on U.S. gas imports has skyrocketed by an unbelievable 175%. It's not just Europe shifting its energy dependency anymore. Hundreds of billions of dollars are now flowing into the United States simply because the traditional energy corridors of the world have been so heavily destabilized. This massive influx of capital is strengthening the U.S. dollar and massively bolstering domestic energy sectors. Now, is this just a happy accident? Well, to back up the claim that this is a deliberate, long-term design, analysts point back to historical admissions. Take former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who outright stated that the goal was to have Europe depend on American energy, not Russian energy. The source material argues that moving the world's energy dependency toward the Western Hemisphere has been a stated national policy for a long time. Whether it's driven by a drill baby drill focus or long-standing strategic documents, analysts like Medhurst argue that the intent to monopolize the energy market has honestly always been hiding in plain sight. So whether you see this as a deliberate grand orchestration or literally just sheer coincidence, observers note one undeniable fact. Corporate shares and energy profits are sitting at record highs amidst all this global instability. As Medhurst puts it, war is a racket, but this is a whole new racket. Even if you totally dismiss the idea of a coordinated conspiracy, the mathematical outcome is exactly the same. When global supply chains are threatened, prices go up, and whoever can provide a secure alternative stands to make an absolute fortune. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this question to chew on. Are we just watching a regional conflict spiral out of control, or are we witnessing a violent, brutal negotiation for completely new dollar-dominated global energy order? The 100 days of escalation we've mapped out today show us that every single missile strike and every broken ceasefire carries massive weight. And that's not just for the people tragically caught in the crossfire, but for the entire global economy. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and remember to keep questioning what's really driving the headlines.